I'm Stephanie, and I will be your introduction coach for AI for Noobs. So, as you know, I'm Stephanie. I am a senior system designer, and I have a specialization in game AI. I'm the CEO of Stockholm Syndrome AI. What we do generally is that we do either service for like custom systems for clients on our service branch, and we also do a lot of R&D projects like Synthetic Soul, which is the project we're currently developing. Synthetic Soul is a bot auto-scripting tool. If you're excited to know more about how actual AI works with game AI, get back in touch with me in the Q&A at the end. So, I make fake homicidal people for a living, and I shipped some games, and I have a very strange design philosophy. I'm not the kind of like very constructive designer who wants the player to have one very specific kind of like experience. What I prefer to do is take the feelings, turn them into a number, and then use the numbers to generate more feelings. So what we mean by artificial intelligence. So in games, game AI is what we consider as an artificial agent is an autonomous entity that will observe the world through sensors and then will act upon its environment. An agent is also can achieve goals, are rational, defined by the theory of economics, and they can also use knowledge or learn from the environment to update their position and decide what to do next. So according to this theory and these principles, it means that your fancy thermostat at home is also an agent. So the depth of an agent is the complexity of the kind of information they receive and also the kind of decision they will kind of take. In the case of the thermostat here, what it knows is that there's a temperature outside of itself. And then it will take a look, and according to a little meter that it has inside, it will be like, okay, it's too cold, not cold enough, and the only thing you can do is turn on the heater in your house, and then at some point it's warm enough, and then it stops the heater. So that's his job. So technically, because he reads the environment and take a decision and take action, the thermostat is an agent in your world. So, what are the types of agent in a game? An agent, we have kind of three categories, if you want. We have the human players, which is a natural agent, like biological people like me. We also have non-player characters, so characters that are basically designed to usually like be like a decorative environment or like an interesting challenge for the player. And we also have something in between, this kind of like hybrid class. This one is called bots. Bots are non-player characters pretending to be humans. So those guys are kind of like a little robot with a wig. I love it. So, and all of those guys have a coefficient of AI-ness, if you want, in the sense that even for the avatar of a human player, if we take the example of The Witcher, Geralt once in a while will just like look around and do things, and also will talk to the user to either like because the game noticed that the player is lost, or we think that they don't know what to do next, and they will the system inside of Geralt is gonna take this cue to give more information to the player. So those kind of little systems that are also found in non-player characters, some of them are kind of replicated to a certain extent in the avatar, and this is very interesting because it's not pushed very far usually, because we want the human player to have an experience as close to being like one-on-one inside the game, but it's something we could use if we wanted to mess with the player a little bit more. More on that later in Q&A if you want. So, how do we design enemies in the world of game design? So the way it works for us is that everything we do is a reflection of what the player and what the avatar of the player is doing, right? So yeah, we are the little skeleton in this case. So every time I start on a new project with a creative director or any game lead designer that is on the project, I would sit down with them and I would ask, what does your AI do? And 100% of the time they say, they do everything, and then they start like having this very long list of things that they want their AI to do. And every time I laugh a little bit, and then I have to proceed to shattering their dreams, because it's just what game designs do. Like, it's just, we're super annoying. So to give you an example of how it works, I will use Zombicide, which is, Zombicide is a fancy board game that is very interesting in a sense that it's kind of like level design the game, if you want. And there's a lot of rules in this game that is in relation to having little characters move around and chase each other, which is what we do a lot of the time in game projects, right? So usually what I do is I use MDA, kind of like a menu for my creative directors to point at what they want for their AI. I'm like, okay, so does your unit, do they have to like position themselves in like the world, find their path? Do they have to like fit into something or like fit things together? Do they need to acquire territories? Like, do they have to do prediction? Do they have to survive? Like, can they trade things? Are they doing collection? Are they chasing, evading, and all those kind of things? And usually what happens, the creative director is going to take, I'm asking them to take like pick the top 3 of all of those information or those actions that the character can do. So usually 90% of the time, what I'm doing is more or less this. Of course, I've been working in Montreal mostly for my career, so this is the kind of game that is mostly done in Montreal, but I'm generally in video games. If you're doing kind of like 2D or 3D, this is going to be your jam. If you're replicating either like RPGs, or if you have like more systems that are based on either like board games or heavy economy systems, you will have more of the other ones that are going to sneak in there. If you want to know more about MDA and how I use it more in depth, please ask me later at the end in Q&A. So what we do is we take the player avatar and like everything the player can do, right? So we give them little names of the little verbs, always verbs. Like, we want to know what they do precisely with verbs. And then we try for each of those verbs to elaborate what is the range for each of these. So like if we take moving, you can move at a certain speed. And in the case of a player, usually the speed is going to range between 0. So you can choose to not move for 1 turn up to 2. Like some units, they will actually move up to 2 space around. Same thing with attack. So they have range attack, they have close melee. There's also like the amount, like the weapon, the payload that you have in your hand. If the character is hitting with a frying pan, or if the character has like a super like flamethrower, usually the damage dealt in one shot in this game is not the same. It ranges from 1 to 3. And so on, and so on, and so on. So they can do search, they can make noise, all those kind of things, which means that your AI is going to be the opposite of that. So usually when we start a project, the AI that we have, if you're not working with like a pre-established brand, usually what we do, like our agents don't really have like a face or a name or anything, right? So what we do is we try to go forward and identify kind of like certain presets for each of the variables that we found for the player, and try to find what we can bring with us for the bad guys, right? So if we say, okay, so we're gonna have like one type of medium, like easy enemy, and then we're gonna have like 2 medium guys, it's gonna be cool, and then after that we want like 1 big like bad guy kind of guy, right? So what we're gonna do is we're going to be like, okay, everything, like we run some tests and everything, and we're like, okay, so everybody above the speed of 1 is very hard. So everybody is more or less at 1, except for this guy here. But we're going to instantiate that guy just a little bit less often. But it's going to be super annoying, and it's kind of easy to defeat, but annoying, right? So, and then they also have what we call like a damage threshold. So this is kind of like the mirror of the damage that a player can deal, right? So those guys, like the walker and the runner, like you can do like a 1-shot, they die. And then the fatty and the abomination, the guys at medium and hard, those guys actually you need like a bigger weapon So you have to go around and do like some searching, which will generate more noise, which will attract more zombies, right? And then we also, like, according to difficulty, we also decided to attribute XP points. And then the last one, which is super annoying, is that basically we give them an aggro priority, right? So for these guys, it means that if you have a bunch of zombies together clustered on a tile in this board game, the one with the smallest aggro number will actually get the shot first. So to kind of simulate the fact that they're kind of like moving around and pushing each other, in this case, you have to kill all the walkers and the runners and everybody on the tile if you want to start killing your abomination. And this is super annoying for a player, but for other reasons also. But more on that later. So once you have kind of like an idea how mathematically those enemies are going to be set up, and kind of like an idea of like how they move and like how you want them to behave, like usually there's like little brainstorm meetings, and it's really cool. And then what we do is we take this information and we start this like little round of all the other trades that we have on the team, and we're like, hey, so do you think they should like have a weapon? Like, do they have equipment? Like, what does it look like? How do they perceive the world? Is it the same? Is their vision like are some of them deaf? Like some of them like does some of them like see a lot further than others? And is it like a context? Is it when they look through the sight of their sniper gun, or is it like all the time, right? Is there like this beast that can sniff you from far away and doesn't need to see you, right? So the same thing also on kind of like the projection side, in a sense that now that you have your math, you want the player to be able to actually look at those stats through the art. I don't know how to express it otherwise, but basically you will choose like a voice and like the noise they make, and then a mesh that looks like what they're doing, and also like all of those VFX that you need, and you will start generating little behaviors and like the rigs and the animations that are going to go with the numbers that you had before. So if we take the numbers from before, this is the visual that comes with these numbers in the game that I was talking about, N00bz. So you can see here that the walker is kind of like the slouchy, like you can see in his posture that is kind of like not super quick, and he doesn't seem super threatening in the sense that he's like this guy that looks a little bit like dead-ish. But yeah, the second one is the one we call the runner. The runner, you can see that he has a little like a gym suit, and is like very fast. Like the action pose is very like quick and dynamic. You know, the fatty. For unknown reason, they made it very voluptuous in this game, and it's very interesting because the fact that the body is bigger gives the impression that you're gonna need more firepower to kill it, and it's kind of true. So they didn't want something that looks super terrifying with a lot of muscle, so they came up with this kind of like alternate, like chubby kind of person. So it doesn't go that fast, but it's also annoying because it has a lot of stamina and resistance, you know. The last one is Abomination. This guy is super muscly. You can see that he wears not a lot of clothing, but it's like very like square-ish and like military-ish kind of gear. Super muscly, with like shards of things like stuck in it. Nothing can stop him. He will walk through whatever and he will come to get you. And that's the vibe they were going for. So now I think you can probably see the reason why, because most people think that we have the description or the look of certain characters first. And it's the case sometimes, but not always. And in the case where you have to come up with the information to inspire a team of artists, I just wanted you to know how it works a bit. So in this case, also what they did is they wanted to create a larger amount of variety in the game, right? And the way they wanted to do this was they don't have a lot of money, and like repressing and like creating new molds is kind of expensive. So what they did is they wanted something also that is simple for the player to remember, like all the rules are working. So instead of creating more and more and more and more variety of zombies, they kept the same. So if you can follow my my arrow here, you can see that these guys are all walkers, all runners, all fatties, and all abominations, but they look slightly different from one another. And the only difference between those three, like the green, gray, and orange, is that the green one, if they are defeated while the player is on the square, the player will take damage. So we pretend that they explode and they blow like acid everywhere, right? So whereas the gray one, you can shoot short range and long range and nothing happen, right? Where in the case of the orange one, they're kind of like the opposite of the green one. They need to be shot short distance, like you need to be melee with them to be able to kill them, to defeat them. So long range doesn't work on them. They're kind of like I think they have like blades or like I don't know, like big scabs or something. I don't remember. So yeah. So this is super interesting because everybody think that they have to create always something new from scratch. But sometimes if you just change the color and a little bit what they look like, how they dress, and you change one number, it's sufficient to create infinities of like combination possible and like variation and potential missions, right? So that keep that in mind in the future. Okay, so as you saw before, we kind of like multiplied the same set by two kind of like variables, right? So what happens is that we created sub-variations of the same archetypes. So usually when you start a game, you have kind of like a pawn class or kind of like a little like biped or entity kind of like class. And from this, we're going to divide like a player one and then the one that's going to serve as the original class for NPCs. And then when we start generating those guys, sometimes we just like have a certain number of them and it's just okay and we don't need more. In some other instances, we're going to have tiers. So if we take those guys here, like those are the grunts, the minions, like the guys that we're going to see often, these serve as a kind of like a dressing on the level, and they're easier to kill. But the more you have of those guys around, the more it's annoying. And then we also have here the mini bosses. Those mini boss, in this case, had similar stats as the walkers, except for the dampening of damage. Like they need more damage to be defeated, but they also have a spawning pattern that the other ones don't have. So the fatties, we decided that when they are instantiated with two smaller zombies with them. So this is the extra other little exception that they have. So this is why they have their separate little subclass here, right? And then the bosses. So in this case, there's only one type of boss. Sometimes, depending on the game, you have more than one. Those guys are usually more custom, and they usually have arenas and like battle lures and plays like that are usually more customs, right? So usually we have less of those guys. In this case, you can see the same pattern. So bosses, the mini boss that have the instantiation pattern that is different, and then the minions, and you can see that they subdivide into our three colored types, right? And then the same. So if the game was like right now, it's a board game, so there's no really like a self-controlled character like that goes around and bots that pretend to play the game. But if we had, like, if the game was the board game was turned into a video game, we could probably have like a fake, like an AI that just replaced one of your player. And this means that they would probably have the option of wearing one of the avatar like character suit, if you want, like the same as the humans, but the entity inside driving would be different. So what are video game agents simulating? So they kind of simulate three things, really. So utility, taking decisions, relatableness, so expressing through their art and voice and clothing and animation how they feel, what they mean, and like the sense they make according to your environment and the message they're trying to broadcast to you. And then there's the last one called pattern recognition, except that we will not talk about pattern recognition today because this implies some form of machine learning or very advanced algorithms, and it's its own can of worms. So maybe I'm going to be invited next year to talk about this more. Maybe, we don't know. So how does agency works for taking decision? How does agency works for players? So there's this concept called 3Cs. So character, camera, and controls. This is kind of a concept that have been developed. I think it originated through the hallways of Ubisoft, actually, if I'm correct. And basically, the shape the character that your character have, the number of limbs, the way it's constructed, and like the flexibility of the different limbs and everything will and the weapons in your hands, like everything about your body will define your experience. Same thing about your camera. The camera will give you information about the world as you go on, and this information will allow you to capture what's going on around you, but also will hide things and create an ambience that will be interesting. So, for example, limbo here, where the camera goes sideways and hide things in the corners. And like, for example, like the big spider thing, like you don't see the whole monster, you just see like extremities of it. And this is very interesting. The same for Mario Kart here. This is the Moebius strip. And in the case of the Moebius strip, the road is twisted and like looped back together. And this means that your head is upside down most of the time. But when the camera was following the player, the way it usually does on the track, you couldn't see that you were actually upside down. So in this case, they locked the Z on the camera so you could see that your character is kind of like going upside down. And it's very interesting control-wise how it feels. The same thing for Candy Crush. Candy Crush is basically the most boring cam in the world. It does nothing. It doesn't move that much, except when you do like combos and stuff, like the camera shake or the world shake, I'm not sure, but like something shakes. But it works for Candy Crush because that's what Candy Crush do. And then the controls. So the way for the same action, the same verb, you might have more than one way of entering this input in the computer, right? So if we take E Honda from a Street Fighter, if you want to do pummel, you have to do like forward, forward, B. It's not exactly true, but let's pretend it is, right? Okay, so you have to enter a combo, right? So the same for if we take Sabin from Final Fantasy VI. For this guy, it's like very slow. There's no time limit or whatever. You just like go down menu, go down menu, go down menu, and then you select pummel, and then it's gonna perform the action automatically, and then there's an outcome, and that's it. The same, like something completely different for Gang Beast. Gang Beast is just like you flop around, and if you're lucky, it's gonna touch someone. There's no real damage, but like maybe you can grab someone also and then like swing them somewhere. But basically, it's kind of like punching also, but in kind of like a input completely different, right? So 3C is part of the HCI loop. HCI loop is there's a human that the human sees the game, sees what's going on, take a decision, will decide of a strategy, will input with their finger, then that will send information to the game will update the game, and the player will be able to see it again. So it makes sense. And you can see that the 3Cs are kind of like in here. The little character lives in the world. The camera is kind of like the window, like the glass in front of your TV. And then the decision-making process is the thing we're looking for. This is utility, right? And then the controller, once again, to send back the information in the machine in the format the machine understand, right? So taking decision, like that makes sense in a context where you have a human player because it's a human, it does things, right? How does it work for the artificial agents that we create? So we kind of have a 3Cs too, in a way. We have a character, we have perception, and we have a brain, right? So the brain is kind of like the controller, is the kind of like the repository of everything you can do in a game, like all the verbs. And we kind of have a utility, but it's not exactly, it's kind of a mirror of what the human can do. The human will do the action they want to do. The AI is going to perform the action it cannot not do. Okay, so if I explain this backward, boop. So you can see that it's a loop, but it's actually kind of like an 8, right? In the sense that the human does the thing, but then the AI will do its thing also. Like every little agent will kind of like react to what the human is doing. So artificial utility. It starts with perception. So perception is you look at the world and you take a look. In the case of an agent, what happens is that they will take a look and they will take little notes in their insight. The insight is the data set inside of them. It's like all the, like it's called AI world or blackboard or whatever. Like it's the list of all the variables they track to eventually take decisions. Then what we're going to do is use this information and the broadcast of this information in the world to give the impression of a difference between the game state and the game view. So technically, an AI, if you show them everything at all time, they would be able to know what's going on, right? So if we take tic-tac-toe, for example, the depth and the difference between the game state and the game view, like what the game is and what the player knows, is the same thing. So basically, if you take this here, like basically for tic-tac-toe, you know everything that ever was, and you're kind of able to predict everything that could ever happen. And all the information you need is here, right? Whereas if we take here StarCraft, those little units here that are the players' units, you can see around that you have kind of like this fog of war with the little gray undertone here. And this is interesting because this fog of war and the undertone are used to hide information to the player, to influence the way the strategy is assembled and hide information, right? So as the little units are moving around, they unhide the little components on the map. And if the unit leaves a zone that is currently lit up by its presence, a little gray fog of war will kind of give you the layout of the map. So the things that are not moving are going to stay there, but the agents that are from the enemies or the other characters that are in the map won't be displayed anymore. So some people could be moving in that zone, and you will never know, right? So so basically, video games are kind of like a very fast board game. The player plays something, all the agents, like all the AI, do something, and then the world manager kind of like moves some, like can instantiate more guys or kill some guys or like, I don't know, trigger, like spawn some traps or whatever. So the world also is kind of an agent to a certain extent. The perception exists in kind of like two different ways. One of them is to simulate but in all the cases, it exists to simulate the discrepancy between game state and game view, a little bit like in StarCraft. Like all the AIs are built in a way to pretend that they don't know everything. So if we take a 3D open world like Horizon Zero Dawn or anything in 2D, we use little stems like to broadcast in the environment. Stems are kind of like little paper plane that we, like a source will emit, and the little character will like collect and then update its information. So the character walks around, it bumps into a source, gets a little paper plane in his eye, and it goes like, oh yeah, I know this now, and write this in their insight, right? So it can be anything. It can be the state of a character, or like what an object is, or it can be like this guy is very pissed off, or like this is a non-threatening person and he sells potion, whatever. Basically, all of those stems are little labels that exist on the environment around the player, or around the bots in this case. So the way the detection construct exists have many shapes and forms. So you usually have volumes. Volumes can be like a radius, like circles, or little capsules sometimes for collisions and other kind of checks, or could be like rectangle if you, instead of like a character, sometimes you have a building or something, and it's okay to have like a square to do your detection, or just like a zone, anything. You can also have Raycasts. Raycasts can be used alone to either detect or like have a an idea of the distance between two elements or other. You can also use Raycast to make little cones of vision. So this, depending on the shape and the length of the cone, it gives you, it will simulate the perception of a human field of vision, right? So if I'm looking at someone and someone is just like behind me here, I won't be able to see the person because my vision goes like 180, right? So that's what we're trying to establish with the cone of vision. And if you go like full-blown stealth mode, usually what happens is we stack some complex cone of vision together. And the goal of this is to have separate little timers and like very like simulate the 3D perception of the human vision, like the peripheral vision and the extended vision. More on that later in the Q&A if you have more questions. We also use Heatmap. So Heatmap are a little bit less popular, I think, but it is amazing. It's kind of hiding information in your pathfinding mesh, right? This is super cool. You can use it for everything. It's awesome. For example, if you wanted to simulate like olfaction, like the sense of smell, you could have a character walk around, and like basically the agent, like the bot, walks around, and you have like this other guy that needs to smell to be very close to see, but can smell you from a distance. And if he walks on those little tiles, and the little timer for smell is not done yet, it can try to like follow the track of the NPC to be able to like find it and eat it, right? That's awesome. And then we also sometimes also use like heat maps for death count. So for example, if you're in a room and you have like little characters coming in and they die, like in some places, what's going to happen is the floor is going to remember. And when a new NPC comes in, it'll be like, okay, so 55 of your friends died here. 10 of your friends died in this like yellow area, and like almost no one died here. Come and position yourself on the green. And the little NPC is going to go and position itself. And it's nice because if your player is camping somewhere, it gives the impression that even if there's no more body on the ground, that this guy here is not completely dumb and does exactly the same thing from like from the new unit to another, right? So it's going to make your challenge change, so the user will have to basically adapt and like be more savvy with this new tactic, right? Okay, so what happens in the case of a strategy game or other forms of board game that are not like that, where the visual exists for the player, but the characters in games don't really see it? So if we take, for example, so this is Civilization. If you take Civilization and you play against Gandhi, because always Gandhi, right? And you play against Gandhi. So Gandhi does not see this map. The only thing Gandhis know about this game is this series of information. So all of this information here is basically perfect. So technically Gandhi could win all the time and always take the best information possible and just like go with the best possible outcome, right? You would have to be a very, very good player to be able to beat him. So because humans are whiny and they always want to win and they complain a lot, what we do is we hide things. Yay! So hiding things like this, they will have to come up with like semi kind of like strategy, being like, I think that this is the best possible outcome. And this is cool because it means that they make mistakes. And humans, they love this. Not too many mistakes, but just the right amount. They want AI to be just dumb enough to be fun, right? So, but in both of the cases, in the case where it was in 3D and you had perception with little sims, or in the sense where you have information that is hidden behind the, like in the big world manager, and you just take a look, it's always the same thing. Information comes in, you take notes, and then you do an action, and then you go back to sensing again, right? So, which brings us to the brain. The brain is, if you remember, the loop is here. So the brain is the sum of everything an NPC can do and what is the context in which it can be done. So it expresses all the patterns, the priority, and the structures in which those behaviors are contained. Yes. So let's see that you have a brain that will contain behavior in which are contained behavioral patterns. So if we take here the guy that has the behavior lose enemy, probably like you will have little patterns like hide behind something. Are you detected? Okay, run towards another point. Okay, do you still see the player? No. Okay, look around. And then like if oh no, he's still there, then select another one of those two previous one. The same here with the ray gun. If you're currently the behavior you're doing is death by ray gun, usually what's gonna happen is you're gonna have the kind of like the make a hole inside of yourself animation and scream. And then the second pattern is probably like fall while ragdolling on the floor, right? So those little snippets can sometimes have like a very ordered kind of like a preordained kind of structure in which they should be played for maximum effect. But in other cases, you can mix and match them, and they happen like whenever they happen. And this is very interesting because it gives the impression of strategy. We're going to get back to this just a bit later. So if we go into each of those little patterns separately, what happened is that the pattern is an instruction for agents to perform. So it's a mechanics, like kind of like what the players are doing. And it's a cluster of information on what to do when you're entering this section of a behavior. So usually the patterns have a name, for example, here, jump forward, and then you would have like a bunch of conditions that have to be true so you can do this, right? So the instruction here are position yourself between 5 and 10 meters, and then you have to take a precise position and then direct your gun probably and aim. And then the animation, play the animation, jump forward, and then do the bark, ahoo, because of course. But in this case, the conditions are that you have to be conscious, you have to be grounded, you have to be on the ground, you have to be standing. So if you're fallen or if you are currently like crawling, you cannot jump. And because it's a jump forward, you have to have a velocity of a certain amount before you're able to jump forward, right? Otherwise, you just jump straight, which is another pattern, right? So a brain contains a lot of patterns, right? And this is very interesting because you can, like one pattern can be reutilized in more than one behavior to save space and memory and like loading and speed and everything. So what happens though is that most of the time certain patterns are actually kind of like specially designed for one of the behaviors. So if we take, for example, like those orange here would be like attack, and then you could have hit reactions, like being hit, would be in blue here, and then hiding, like basically like just like being there, smoking a cigarette or whatever, or just like, I don't know, look into the trash. I don't know what NPCs do. They do things. Or having a conversation, for example, could be another type of behavior. Everything depends on what the world is and what they're doing, right? So usually, according to context, what's going to happen is that it's going to be impossible for certain units to do certain things at the current moment. So if we take the moment here, everything that is pink and purple was canceled. And the reason for this, let's say, is that they entered combat. And while you enter combat, it kind of look weird when you just like poke your friend and like start a conversation and stop fighting, or just like go take cover and like eat candy. Like it makes no sense, right? So it's a kind of the reason why we kind of make those little structures and contexts and rules in the behaviors. So if we say, okay, so the behaviors is you're going to lose player, attack the player, and then die by ray gun. It seems like, so to lose the player, they played 3 pattern, and then the little guy was out of sight, so it sneaked back and then decided to attack the player, and he was able to, or it was able to do 4 patterns, and then what happened is the player turned around, found him, and just like lasered that guy. So ray gun for everyone, and then it died. So this here, the things that were played, no matter what was played, gives the impression that this little guy here had a very precise strategy and he was going in to perform something. Whereas what we know actually is that each of those little patterns were randomly selected from a pool of things that were possible and was the only thing that the player could, the NPC, the bot, could do at that time in space. The way we do this is using decorators, so and, or, and conditions. And then basically we have, like we can be performed in code, or we also can use state machines or other form of like behavior tree or utility matrix. In all of those contexts, basically what happens is just like a fluid logic that goes around, and you can the logic is going to basically select one of those little boxes here, like one of the behavior, right? The same for action here, the scatter, so like the highest number is selected, and then this is the action that is going to be performed. So in each of those contexts, like the logic behind is similar, it's just the structure in which it's represented that is different. So for utility, so how we fake taking decisions, right? Because we saw earlier that there's kind of like this randomness that is applied, which is kind of true. So to arrive to something that looks kind of human, what we do is for the little characters that are human, or at least like sentient-ish, what we do is we give them desires, things like outcomes that they want to happen, and fears, like things that they don't really want to happen. And they will update their strategy to try to match this. So if you're the little boy here and I ask you, do you take the cake or do you eat the apple? It might depend on it might depend just on preference in itself, or it could also be that the cake in itself is it's your 55th cake, and maybe you're kind of tired of cake, or maybe you're allergic to cake and you don't want to eat this. So contextually, cake is not your best outcome. And if it's your 55th cake, you might also want to choose a third option, which is stop doing this, like stop eating because it hurts and you can't anymore, which is also a potentially good option in this case. So investment and compromise. So yeah, like basically the rules that we kind of structure for those little units is kind of like the written rule that represent the cost, the risk, and the benefit of what the little character can get out of there, and like how much of what they will allow to risk to get what kind of benefit. So that's kind of what we're establishing here. So if we take an example here, if we take the same unit, so the first tree is the same unit that has full health, like full HP, everything is great, and the one on the right it has like low HP, so less than 20%, right? So on the one on the left, what's going to happen is that when it goes, if it's in combat, it cannot go idle, so it's going to go here, and then it will have the chance of like entering closer combat or fleeing from the character or the other NPCs, right? So what we're going to do is, since it's full HP and we want those guys to look like very fierce and stuff, we're going to send them go like offensive and defensive combat, but priority on offensive pattern. We want them to look like gritty and like they're coming at you, right? But maybe that with time, as HP is lowering, maybe past the point of 20%, like they know they're gonna die. So what's gonna happen is they still cannot go in idle because it's still combat, but they might have a higher chance of fleeing. So every time the tree ticks, every time the new frame comes in and they have to take a new decision, they might choose to flee instead of staying in combat. If they have if randomness says that they stay, or if they cannot escape combat, then what's going to happen is that they might do offensive less often, and then they might go into defensive also more often. And this is the same tree. It's really just like the and the or and the conditions that you establish in your little intersections. Like, keep in mind, this is like fake trees. It's not like a real logic, but close enough, right? Okay. Now that your NPCs are constructed and they're ready to go into the world, you just free them and everything is great. No. So if you have more than one unit in your world, and or if you even just have like one NPC and one player, what's going to happen is what we call emergence. So ever heard of emergence? It was a kind of like a buzzword, but it's also a thing, and we're going to talk about that right now. Yes. So we're going to talk about contextual overrides. Contextual overrides are kind of like little limitator. A little bit on that a little bit later. So as we mentioned before, player does things, enemies do things, and then game manager does things. Game manager spawn, remove, trap things, right? Right. So what happens when we do this and many people do take decisions, many NPCs take decisions at the same time? What you get is those things. So this is a real life scene, but I mean, it could as well be from GTA or from like Watchdog or any other game, right? What you see here is somebody got wounded. This guy also is wounded. This guy's receiving attention. Everybody in the background is like taking Instagram and like selfie, like, and then you have the police being pissed at, I guess this is a bus. I don't know exactly, but yeah. So what people see is one accident. What I see is a series of rules that happen all at the same time. So what happened is that pedestrians cross at intersection on the green light, always. And then cars, they will stop at the intersection on the red light 85% of the time. So sometimes they don't stop. And then pedestrian will look at NPCs if they're being injured. So if somebody is being injured, they will back off and look at that person. And then paramedics, if they find an injured NPC, will cluster and like perform like healing actions, right? And then police officer in the same area will try to arrest violent NPCs. So in this case, what happened is that the bus didn't stop at the red light while the NPC, the civilian was walking around, and basically he just rammed into the civilian. So that poor civilian fell on the ground, and all of those guys are doing one thing, independently of all the other ones. They don't know, right? But it gives the impression of people working together towards something that seems even more cohesive than it actually is. Those guys they don't know that the other ones are there. So what happens is that sometimes you want to contain some of those guys doing random things that they decided to do on their own, right? So we call this contextual overrides, as I mentioned before. So it's either volumes or smart objects or a world state or like progression or the NPC's data inside. Like basically we use all of these information to kind of like constrain this inner information and decision taking that they do. So contextual override, let's talk about volumes. So sometimes if you have like, let's say this like red mission here in this neighborhood, if you trigger a mission, sometimes what we want to have is like everybody's super aggressive by default. Like nobody spawns like super chill and like go stand in a corner and like, and play dice with their friends. No, they spawn, they want you dead. They don't know where you are, but they want you dead. And that's what they do. So usually we do this in this area and like you don't see it, but technically, and usually we don't spawn people like of that army type around, or if you have like someone in ambient life that comes in and goes into that volume, they would turn into angry also, even if they were not before. The same thing here. So this is Far Cry. In the case of Far Cry, this is like a cutscene, right? So what we do in Far Cry usually is that we set a little volume around a cutscene to prevent the ambient life to come in. It happened once during a demo that Jaguar walked in and just ate the mission giver. The game is not supposed to do that. Everything crashed, and that was great. And my boss was not happy. But yes, so yeah, like you have to work with your level designers to ensure that that does not happen, or your boss will not be happy. We also use contextual, those little smart object guys. Smart objects are little objects that have a mesh usually, but also have little invisible mathematical handle on the object, so an NPC can come in and there's like a little partial brain override. So the object in itself contains a mini brain, and while it's super creepy, while the NPC touch the element, the inner brain that they have will stop working, and the object's gonna control them. So if the NPC touch the turret's gonna be like, "Hey, welcome. Let me basically kill those guys for you." And the turret's gonna do this, telling the NPC how to move and move around and stuff. And then this way, once they're done or once the NPC die, the turret's gonna release the NPC. The NPC is gonna be like, okay, this is cool, and it's gonna go back to being like a normally brained NPC. The same for the doors. The same for like a park bench. Did you notice that NPCs don't die through doors anymore? The reason for this is that the doors are smart objects. They open the door, and when they touch, like when they position their feet on the door is like, hi, welcome, I'm the door. And then the door is like, okay, cool. So like we're going to play the open door animation. And then if they get shot while they're walking through the door is like, hi, I notice you're currently dying. Can you take like 2 steps left for me? And then play your death animation, and then they die. And this way, your door, like the door frame, remains accessible to everyone. It's a bit creepy, but it's a bit how it works, kind of. We also use those kind of smart, invisible, like meshless smart object to trigger car accident or trigger elements that usually should be something that is emergent, right? Other things could be like world data. So in this case here, this guy, this is an entity that usually roams around and like fight you and do things. In this case, this guy is just like blocking this place, and they made him talk because they don't want you to go there. And that's it. I don't remember. I played that game a long time ago, but I don't think this guy is entering combat. But yeah, like it's kind of like it's not its normal behavior, but he's doing this because he has to, because the world said so. In these guys here, The Sims. The Sims is really interesting. It's like AI inside AI inside AI, played by a player. Super weird. But these guys here, they have like a very large amount of patterns they can do, right? And those patterns are also tagged with an emotion. So in the case of the emotion mortified or in the zone or energized or very flirty, you will have some decisions or some action they will want to do a lot more than the other ones, and it will become kind of like the choices they're giving you, like more and more. And it's going to be very hard as a player to do anything else than what they're trying to do, and sometimes it's just becoming impossible. So this is very interesting also. It's kind of constraining the player and by itself making AI different. Super weird. The Sims, you're weird. And this is how we write the bleeding edge of chaos. So we're running out of time. We're probably like more than halfway through the time that was allocated. So we have so many more topics that we could be talking about. And keep in mind that current game AI is like animations in the 90s, like where you would get hit and then go in the air and then fall down. And then it was actually a true, like a hole, and not like the platform, and then you will fall through. So game AI right now is the same thing. It's like stupid compared to what we could do. It's just that we don't push it that far because we assume that people don't want that. But as we're going deeper with our agent, we're going to be able to define new types of gameplay, and it's going to blow your mind. So, and it's also a good way to create a safe space to learn how to better human. Yeah. So thanks a lot. If you have any questions, I'm here for Q&A. I'm Stephanie Bouchard from Stockholm Syndrome AI, and I hope to have captured your interest with this amazing talk.